Alright, welcome everybody to week 11, day 2. Today we're going to be talking about framing, kind of continuing our discussion and critique of the media and science and things like that. We're going to be talking about framing today. So, I hope you all had fun with the unknown news story, media story assignment that we did. It's pretty low-key, just posted on Discord. I've been going through your fallacies treasure hunt and giving my own thoughts on which fallacy was posted. Some of them, were kind of dubious, but overall, I'm pretty impressed by it. Should give you that experience working with fallacies and identifying fallacies and things like that. Okay, so framing. This is farming. It's different from framing, although that is a frame of a barn, and that's a frame too on the roof there. So a frame is an important concept in this class. A frame is a mental construct. A frame is a way of looking at the world. A frame is a simplistic way of looking at the world because the world is a very complicated and detailed place. There's billions and billions of people, all of which who have their own identities and views and beliefs and perspectives and things like that. And we can't deal with it. If you've ever read a history textbook, that would be a great example of it. Like, how would you characterize the relationship of England and France over the years? Has anyone studied European history? How would you characterize the relationship between the countries of England and France? England later on became, of course, the United Kingdom. Britannia and Francia, the Kingdom of the Franks. Anyone? Nobody took European history? How would you describe the relationship? Nope. Sorry. Okay. Well, so when I study Euro history, it always seemed to me to be a kind of like two siblings that don't get along very well, and sort of actively try to sabotage each other for most of the history of European history. More or less, if England was for something, France would be against it. If France was for something, England would be against it. This applies in Louis XIV's time, in Napoleon's time, right up until about World War One, in which England, of course, joined in on France's side against Germany, and so that was how I studied European history. That was how I memorized it. That's how I was able to make, predictions and things like that. Like, all right, if this happened, then this would happen. And it's a frame. Okay, so the notion of England and France being sort of like squabbling siblings was a mental frame that I used to think about European history. It's just gross oversimplification because you're talking about centuries of history, right? And the Norman invasion, 1066, was a French invasion of England, right? And France invaded again in 1215. France invaded again after the signing of the Magna Carta. Most people don't know that. It was a actually pretty serious invasion, and France probably would have won if King John hadn't died suddenly. And the English always say, well, we haven't been invaded since 1066. Yeah. Yeah. So, Glorious Revolution of 1688, something like that. But the thing is, my point is, like, you have centuries of history, and you have all sorts of diplomatic relations going back and forth. You have the Catholic King James, who flees to France for safety after the Glorious Revolution of 1688. It's big and complicated. And so what we do is we use frames to simplify a topic because our heads aren't very big, right? We have a limited amount of brain space to try to represent the world. And so what we do is we simplify it. And sometimes we simplify it too much. And that's kind of the topic of today, okay? And this is what the media does a lot. Like, the media will have a frame on a situation. For example, the Fox News frame on illegal immigration is, like, I was listening to the news this morning, and they're saying, why is nobody talking about the million illegal immigrants that came across the border this morning? And that's one of their frames, right? And if you look at CNN, they don't call it illegal immigration, right? By and large, they have a different frame for it. Right? And do you call homeless people, or do you call them unhoused persons, right? Like there's different frames that we use, and these frames percolate down into media, into the vocabulary we use, the terminology we use, because the way that you sort of look at a topic influences how you come to your conclusion. Okay. And so in argumentation, if you can control the frame, a lot of times you're going to win the debate, right? If you can control the terminology used, if you can control the way that people think about an issue, like what is the most important thing when it comes to immigration? If you can say the most important thing is law and order and people following the laws, then any person who crosses the border without permission is a rule breaker, and right? Or you say, what is the most important thing when it comes to immigration? It's humanitarian aid, right? It's taking care of people that are in trouble. It's economic opportunities, right? If you can say that's the important thing that we really need to talk about, is like helping people that need help, then you're going to win the debate, right? The frame that you agree to in a debate oftentimes determines who wins the debate. So let's go through some examples of this. And you're like, wait, this applies to programming too? Yes, it does. And we'll get into some examples of that as well. The mental frame that you use when you program is extremely important, and it can kill if you're not careful with that. So here is, of course, SMBC, one of my favorite webcomics. I read it multiple times a day, usually just flipping to random comics. It is an incredibly good comic if you're into logic and philosophy and critical thinking, things like that. So why framing is important. Humanity looked with envy upon Saturn for centuries. No more. We have said to the heavens, we have created our own rings and placed them in our own orbit. That's an uplifting way of framing the situation. The depressing way of framing the situation is currently there are approximately 6,000 tons of man-made space junk orbiting the planet. Right? Same situation, same reality, but you can frame it in very different ways. Right? Like, look at our success at being able to do all these launches, or you can say, this is a problem, we're not going to be able to do space exploration if it gets worse. Right? Does this kind of make sense to you? How you can frame it? It's a simplified way of looking at reality. Okay, and you can have different frames on the same facts. Okay. So here's some examples in politics. So I put a giant asterisk here. Maybe it's not giant, but there's an asterisk on both of these because these are gross simplifications. So don't come after me and say I know a right-wing person that's against gun control or whatever. These are just broad generalizations. Okay, so same topic, different frames. Okay, left-wing on the abortion debate, the term they use is pro-choice, right? For people who support the rights of women to have abortions, it's pro-choice. Right-wing, pro-life. Right? We support the natural right of babies not to be killed. Same debate, same issues, same women's bodies that are pregnant. Very different views, very different ways of looking at the same topic. And that's why debates oftentimes are completely pointless, because they're arguing about different things. The left wing is like, women have a right to control their own body. And basically nobody disputes that, right? And on the right, they're saying babies have a right to life, and nobody disputes that. But when these two things intersect, right, and when you have a fetus or a zygote or embryo or baby, whichever term you want to use, inside of a woman's body, you now have an overlapping problem, right? And that's why the abortion debate has just never been resolved, because they're talking past each other, right? They're talking about two very different issues, and the terminology reflects this, right? You would think that if it was a debate, you would have one side would be called pro, and the other side would be called con or anti, right? And in fact, if you look at left-wing, news media outlets and things like that, they'll phrase the debate as between pro-choice activists and anti-choice activists, which is framing, right? You are against people having choice, over their own bodies. Brilliant, brilliant framing, right? And then on the right, you have pro-life, and then you have I don't see people calling the left anti-life, but usually they usually frame it in terms of like baby killers, and things like that. And and so oftentimes you can tell the bias of a media outlet or a news story or a person just talking to you if they're left or right wing based on what terminology they use. Okay? Framing is definitely a form of bias. It's absolutely a form of bias because it's your perspective on the issue. If you're saying fundamentally the question of abortion is whether a woman has the right to control her own body, that is an incredible frame. That is your view on the situation. Okay? It's like you're looking at the world through a frame. That's your frame. Whereas if you look at it in the question of does a baby have a natural right to life, that's a different frame. And these frames aren't pointed the same way. They're looking at the same topic, but one of them's coming, in this direction, one of them's coming in this direction, and that's why they just talk right past each other in a debate, because they're debating fundamentally different questions. And the sticky point is like there's no good answer to when a person gains a natural right to life, right? The line right now is drawn at birth, and and that's why the controversy over like partial birth abortions was such a big deal. If you are half born, do you have a right to life then? And these issues are very sticky and tricky, and I don't have any answers for you. I'm just a person who finds the situation interesting, right? Not like I'm enjoying it, but it's just interesting because you have very intelligent people and very moral people and reasonable people that just can't talk to each other because they're talking about fundamentally different things. And yeah, it's definitely a form of bias. Absolutely. Single payer healthcare, socialist healthcare, right? And so I've never seen like Obama describe his healthcare as socialism. Maybe he has. I don't think I've ever seen it. It's always come from Republicans who describe Obama, the Affordable Care Act. I shouldn't call it Obamacare, right? Because Obamacare is a frame on the issue. This is Obama's healthcare system, right? It's Obama's design. It's Obama's medicine, right? And Obama sort of owned it after a while. Like at first he didn't. I don't think he liked it being called Obamacare, but then later on he's like, I like the term. It sounds like Obama cares. I don't mind it. And the big thing is like Obamacare was modeled on a Republican healthcare plan in Massachusetts, right? Like the whole design was a Republican one, and they were fine with it when it was Republican, but because Obama adopted it in the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, which the name Affordable Care Act is itself a frame, right? The names of bills, right? The Affordable Care Act, has healthcare costs gone down in the past 8 years? Let's find out. Let's see if we can find a quick graph on this. That's up to 11, 2010, 2000. Okay, here we go. Net cost of the insurance provisions of the ACA, billions of years by fiscal year. That doesn't tell us anything. That also doesn't go up to the current year. Yeah, so it looks like since the ACA was passed, was 2010. Yeah, it looks like healthcare costs have almost doubled since then. So, yeah, and that's more than inflation, right? So, even the name of the Affordable Care Act, which was supposed to reduce the cost of medicine, didn't, right? I have no idea if that is the actual name of the bill. Yeah, it's called the Affordable Care Act, but itself is a frame, right? And like when we were talking about the term racism and like talking about the races of humanity, that itself is a frame. That's one of the reasons why I don't like using the term. You have to, because that's the term that people talk about, and if you want to communicate with people, you have to use shared vocabulary. But the very notion that there are races of humanity is, like I said, in science, a race is when you have a genetically distinct group. And while there are some variations, where people come from, it affects the genetic distribution. They're not races. right? But that's a frame, and that's one of the really sticky points when it comes to racism, is that the very terminology we use to discuss racism and criticize it actually comes from the scientific racism debacle of the 1910s and 20s and eugenics and all that kind of stuff, right? So politics makes your head hurt. Yeah, it should, right? And so the right wing denounced it as socialism, except not when they did it, right? And the left tends to call it just single payer healthcare. That's not Obamacare, by the way. Obamacare is not single payer healthcare. There's still private insurance companies and things like that. They created a marketplace where insurance companies could put up their plans and people could pick from it, which honestly shouldn't be considered very objectionable to the right, because they believe in free markets, right? So we're creating a marketplace where you could put up plans for sale, things like that. But what the left wants, or at least part of the left wing wants, the Democrats want, is single payer healthcare, which is what most of the nations in the world have, where the government just pays for everyone's healthcare and you can get supplemental if you want. And so that's called single payer healthcare if you're from the left, and it's called socialist healthcare if you're from the right. And so which frame you pick, that makes a big difference on if people like it or not. And you can see this in polls. Like, you can ask people, like, do you support socialist healthcare? And they'll be like, no, and then it's like, well, do you support the government, Medicare or whatever, paying the healthcare of elderly people? Oh yeah, well, yeah, of course, grandma would die without it. Same people, right? And so a lot of like how people respond to surveys and questions on tests and things like that really depend on how you frame the question. For example, if you want to talk about young Earth creationism, right? Young Earth creationism is the notion that the Earth is about 6,000 years old, and that number comes about from like starting at Genesis and counting all the generations that are listed in the Bible and kind of coming up with an estimate of about 6,000 years, give or take. And so if you ask about that, if you just ask Americans, is the Earth 6,000 years old, you get a certain percentage. Like, I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head. It's like 10 or 15%. But if you frame the question in such a way, like, do you think the Bible is accurate when it says that the Earth is 6,000 years old? You will get 40% of people, something like that, saying yes, because they don't want to say, because America is 80% Christian. They don't want to say, oh, I think the Bible's wrong, right? And so by framing the question a different way, you can get radically different answers to the exact same question. And this is something that people in politics know and exploit. This is what the media knows and exploits. This is what pollsters and survey people know and exploit. By very carefully crafting questions in such a way, you can get the answers you want to a certain extent, right? You can push the numbers up or down quite substantially, right? There's a huge range you can get. So, Ken Ham, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so refugees versus potential terrorists. Donald Trump's son, I think, described, the refugees as like, you have a bowl of M&Ms and one of them's poisonous, do you let them in, right? That's a frame. Undocumented workers versus illegal aliens, right? Illegal aliens sounds terrifying. It sounds like E.T. is like breaking the law. You know what I mean? Like, Like, alien sounds like, like Independence Day or something, or like, what was the alien on American Dad? Right? Roger, that guy, yeah. So, like, that's an illegal alien, right? And, whereas the left's frame, an undocumented worker, that's just somebody who forgot their documentation. Like, I went to work today and I forgot my ID, It's a very it's same topic, just very different frames, right? Different ways of looking at the same issues. Roger, yeah, thank you. Right, free speech, left, giving cover to Nazis, right? There's a big issue in America right now over the free speech issue. Especially in younger people, the belief in freedom of speech is actually, it's much less popular in younger people than in older people, which is an interesting trend. And especially what we saw with the Oscars, with like Will Smith hitting Chris Rock. The question of speech, right? is speech violence? Because that's one of the reasons why free speech has become less popular in younger people, is because they equate speech with violence, right? And then we see Will Smith hitting Chris Rock, and it's like, okay, well, if speech is violence, then Rock was being violent, and Will Smith had a right to defend himself, right? Or you could take the old Enlightenment notion that words and actions are on two separate sides of a fairly bright line. The Enlightenment ideal is that you've got words and ideas are free to discuss in a free society, but actions are where you draw the line, right? So you can talk about anything you want, but when you get to the point of actually hitting somebody, then you've crossed the line and have your Oscar stripped from you or whatever. Okay. Ricky Spanish. Who is Ricky Spanish? I'm not familiar. Oh, is that the? Yeah, that's the when he dressed up as that. Right. So, I cannot see free speech as an excuse for violence. Yeah, it's an interesting discussion, right? But that's the reason why we're seeing all of these restrictions on speech, right? Because if you equate speech and violence, then people exercising free speech are committing violence against other people, and it needs to be restricted. And so that line that we've had since the Enlightenment period, 1600s, 1700s, it's blurring right now, right? And so as a society, we need to figure out where that line is. It's something that I think needs to be discussed a lot more. And maybe the Will Smith, thing, Chris Rock thing, will prompt a little more reflection. Although, yeah. On Twitter, sorry, can't keep a straight face when I say that. Acted non-verbia, yeah, actions, not words. Yeah, that's more like prove to me that you're doing something through actions and not words. But yeah, the traditional bound in society is speech is over here, verbs are over here, and that's like one of my friends says this non-ironically. Like if somebody says something you don't like, you can hit him because if you he's a member of Antifa, and so if you're against Antifa, anti means you're fascist, and we don't respect fascists, so you can hit them, right? So, this is the Antifa flag free speech. Let's see if I can find the argument here. I'm now on an FBI watch list. Can't find it. Surprising that meme made all the rounds too. Yeah, here's basically the argument against free speech. Okay, so the paradox of tolerance by Karl Popper, who's a very famous philosopher of science, especially. Should a tolerant society tolerate intolerance? We opposed to Nazism. You want more tolerance? Respect my ideas. The answer is no. It's a paradox, but unlimited tolerance can lead to the extension of tolerance. When we extend tolerance to those who are openly intolerant, then the tolerant ones end up being destroyed, and tolerance with them. Any movement that preaches intolerance and persecution must be outside the law. As paradoxical as it may be seen, defending tolerance requires us to not tolerate the intolerant. And yeah, it does actually seem like a paradox, right? Because it is, right? If you demand intolerance towards intolerance, you're self-critical, right? So, but this here is what's going on in our society right now. which is the notion that any movement that preaches intolerance and persecution, basically any movement that preaches intolerance, must be outside of the law and criminalized and canceled, right? Like that's what we're seeing with cancel culture, right? And the trouble is intolerance is a moving target, right? And if you look at the targets that cancel culture has been going after, it's a sliding scale, right? Like you have some very worthy people to get canceled, like Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby and things like that. And then you've got like who's the guy from Parks and Rec? What's the guy's name? There's a lot of funny people in Parks and Rec. What's the Aziz Ansari, right? And so you can read that story, and it's kind of like, okay, not Chris Pratt. Now, as far as I know, Chris Pratt's never been canceled. But no, Aziz Ansari. He was hooking up with a fan of his, and basically, you can read the story. I'm not going to put my own spin on it, but yeah, it's not. Okay. So that's sort of the perspective that you see from that part of the left right now, right? And so the trouble is, like, if you allow one group to determine what is tolerant and intolerant, then everybody on the opposing party is automatically intolerant and deserves to be canceled and attacked and things like that. And that's really, really bad for a society. If you can't control, if you don't have very clear, guidelines on like what is intolerant and not, then the justified intolerance, because that's Popper justifying their intolerance towards people, it spirals out of control. So, Chris Pratt was canceled for being Christian. That's interesting. Yeah. So, yeah, this is a big issue in our society right now. It's a giant unsolved issue in our society right now. And I honestly wish this is the kind of thing that the media would talk about, rather than repeating whatever topics they repeat over and over again on the air. You can put on Hannity and basically hear the same keywords coming out of his mouth like every night. The left wing Green New Deal. Oh, man, I can't do it. MS. He has this whole like just series of keywords that he just over and over. Yeah, and so this, it's a really big issue. It's a really big issue, and you have like journalists being attacked by Antifa, and they justify it, right? Like, this guy was beaten, got brain damage, by Antifa. He's a right wing journalist. Like, I'm not going to say he's a neutral journalist. He's most definitely a right wing journalist, at least in the sense of covering the Antifa issue. But are we allowing people to beat journalists covering a story now because we don't like their political views? Like, that's kind of terrifying. It's kind of terrifying that after he got brain damage, they still justified the attack. Yeah. So, on the energy front, that's been like I said, Fox has been running that over and over again. It's so boring. Like, basically with all the high gas prices, the issue is that the Biden administration hasn't approved enough new permits for drilling. So they've approved like 1,000 or 5,000 or something, but not enough. And it's just like this really boring, issue. Like the paperwork, like we're going to get upset about the paperwork, and it's like, yeah, okay, gas prices are high, but like getting upset about bureaucracies not being efficient or slow is just a really odd thing to get upset about, What about Paul Miller? The Auto Group? I don't know. Oh, okay, all right. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not familiar with the. I'm not familiar with them at all. Okay. Yeah. So basically, the way the left phrases it is drilling for oil, right? Because it just puts in mind these like images of like we search for drilling for oil, like the big, like these big offshore oil wells and like the oil derrick, this kind of thing, and sprays of oil flying everywhere, and stuff like that. Bakersfield. Apologies if you're from Bakersfield. I don't know if you're not from Bakersfield. There's a lot of oil drilling that takes place around there. Oildale, I think, is North Bakersfield or something. And so the right phrases it as energy exploration, becoming energy independent, right? And the left tends to think of it in terms of like climate change, green energy, oil, drilling for oil, right? But also like oil spills, the Exxon Valdez disaster in, what was it, the late 80s or something like that. Birds covered in oil and that kind of stuff. What's that? 1990. Yeah. So you have all these shots of like people like, there's oil just everywhere and there's like birds and stuff like that. Okay. So those are different frames. Does that make sense? Those are frames on the same issue. Like, should we produce more petroleum? That's the neutral way of putting it, right? In America, should we produce more petroleum? That's the neutral way. That's the question. Should we increase our production of gasoline? Should we decrease it? That's the question. But the frames are different. Do you understand? Like, Fox, again, we'll put in terms of like being, sticking it to Putin, right? Because if we make our own gas, we don't need to buy gas from Russia, right? And the left, again, is concerned about climate change. The right doesn't seem to be, which is interesting. CO2 production, things like that. Y'all, do you understand where we're getting at here? There's a lot of examples of this. I could keep going. Yeah. I just had to make another page, like when we talked about racism, there's a big, like what we talked about was like systemic racism versus individual acts of discrimination, things like that. What and they talk past each other, right? Because when the left uses the word racism, the right uses a different meaning, right? And the left tends to use the word like gun safety. I was listening to NPR, and they said, the right is against gun safety, and I'm like, that's an odd take, What do you mean the right is against gun safety? Like, I've never met a gun owner that was like, put your gun in the microwave, like, set your bullets on fire and get a welding torch and set, like, I've never met a nut that was like against gun safety. Like, that's a bizarre claim. And then I realized after listening to it for a while what I was listening to, which was that they're talking about gun control, or what the right would call gun control, right? Or gun rights, if you want to go even further, right? Should Americans have gun rights? Well, of course you should. Who could be against gun rights, And so the left hasn't had like a good frame to counter that, because they use the term gun control usually. But gun control still sounds very authoritarian, right? Like, we want to control your guns, like Hitler, right? And so I was like, oh, I'm watching the birth of a new frame. That's cool. And so I was like driving home, and I like came home and made a new slide and like, typed it in before I forgot about it, because I was like, cool, the left is coming up with a new frame that can work as well as gun rights. Like the Second Amendment is a, fundamental right in America, right? And so gun control just doesn't work very well. Americans are very dubious of government intervention and restriction of liberties and things like that. So I was like, oh, gun safety. Yeah, who could be against gun safety? And that's the thing, right? Like, who could be against being for choice? Who could be against life? Do you understand? Like, when you have a good frame, it's like, who could be against this? Nobody could be against this, Or the opposite way. Who could be for illegal activities? It's illegal, Who could be for giving cover to Nazis? They're Nazis, And that's what makes for a good frame, is that It should, when you frame it a certain way, the right answer is self-evident. Of course we should have more gun safety. Of course. Who would want gun unsafety? Of course I'm going to support you in your gun safety efforts. And that's what makes for a really powerful frame. Contrariwise, when you talk about gun rights, who could be against gun rights? Who could be against, you having the right to own, you know? And so when you join Congress, I know the Republicans do this. I think the Democrats do too. I'm not 100% positive. They will actually hand you a handbook of terms. And they're like, you have to use these terms when you're speaking to the media or to your constituents and things like that. These are the frames that we use. So you cannot use the term global warming, right? You have to use the term energy independence. You cannot use the term undocumented worker. You have to use the term illegal alien. And they actually sit you down, your orientation at Congress, like, welcome to Congress. You're one of the 500 or so most powerful people on the planet. Here are the words that you have to use. You cannot use your own words. You have to use our words. And that's one of the ways that the parties maintain consistency in messaging. The party will come up with a few talking points every week. These are the points we're going to try and push in the media. And talking heads go on media and repeat the talking points. And they go on all the media outlets and they repeat their talking points. And that's basically what America discusses for that week. And in my opinion, that hides the actual issues. Like, how are we going to handle this divide, between, free speech and action and things like that? Like, the actual topics that I think really need to be talked about just don't. They just don't. And like I said, with racism, there's two very different definitions of racism at the same time in our culture, and it causes all sorts of chaos and problems and angst and thinking that the other side is evil and et cetera, et cetera. Whereas in reality, when you understand the other person's perspective, it's a lot harder to hate them. Right? Now, sometimes you do. Like, sometimes if somebody's actually a Nazi, you can be like, all right, I understand you and I hate you. Like, that's one thing. But a lot of the animosity and a lot of the division and a lot of this bifurcation of our society into two groups, like, if you ask people today, like, would you date somebody from the opposing political party? It's, like, lower now than it's ever been. And that's a problem. That's a splitting of a society, and it's not healthy. And a lot of it is just because they don't understand people from the other side. They don't understand where they're coming from. They don't understand their frames. And most of these things are done with good intentions in mind, right? Like, when you're punching Nazis, you're trying to, like, Nazis genocided the Jews, right? And the Roma and gay people and the handicapped, right? Like, Nazis are some of the most evil people on the planet, and they're opposed to it. And that's coming in general from a good place, right? And at the same time, supporting free speech is coming from a good place. Every person should have the right in a society to express their views without having them punched in the face with a bike lock, right? And allowing violence against people for expressing their political views is incredibly dangerous, because that's how you get civil wars, right? If you're just saying, like, hey, I voted this way, and somebody can punch you, and everyone's like, yeah, that's a huge problem. That's political violence. And that's something that we've never allowed in America for good reason. Couldn't you say the same for the Mao or Stalin supporters? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Believe me, there are plenty of bad people in history. Hitler is an obvious one. Stalin killed more people than Hitler, and so did Mao. Pol Pot, I would even say, not on numbers, but in terms of just pure evil, I would say Pol Pot is maybe even worse than Mao and Stalin and Hitler. Sure. Yeah, there's plenty of horrible people in history. Idi Amin and Kathy Griffin. I'm kidding. Okay. So, Robert Mugabe, yeah. Ho Chi Minh is an interesting case, right? So, like, Woodrow Wilson has a lot of blame for the modern world order, right? And Wilson, like, wanted to start, like, the proto-United Nations, the League of Nations, right? Maybe it didn't happen. That's interesting. Call a question. Interesting. Yeah, okay. I have to read that before I repeat it as fact. Okay. So what I had heard, and which may be a lie, was that Ho Chi Minh appealed to Wilson to get America's support for Vietnamese independence, because Wilson was advocating for the right of self-determination for small countries, right? The right of small countries to be free. And so he's like, well, what about Vietnam? And Wilson's like, but might be myth. So I don't know. I need to look that up. Interesting. So, and the myth or true, I don't know. Like I said, I haven't fully read that yet. Was that pushed him towards the arms of the communists, because the Western world, with its democracy and right of determination for small countries, was like, haha, but not for you, not for you. But who knows? Apparently, it's not true, or maybe it is. I don't know. I have to look at it. History's fun. History's interesting, right? So who could be against choice? Who could be for cover for Nazis? Who could be against life? Who could be against free speech? Right? That's what makes a frame good and powerful. So I don't know if any of you guys play video games or are aware of a company called Blizzard. They have made some indie titles like Diablo and Warcraft, World of Warcraft. They're like a little small game shop in Irvine. So, your favorite indie classics? I know, right? Like, it's just a cute little company. Yeah. So Blizzard has Overwatch. Yeah, a little indie title, Overwatch. Right. I'm being sarcastic. I'm being sarcastic. So there's been an ongoing saga with Blizzard. And apparently it's over. Yesterday, the EEOC announced that they're going to be accepting Blizzard's offer of however many millions of dollars in fines to make the problem go away. I guess it's nice when you have Overwatch, you can just pay to make your sexual harassment problems go away. That's nice. But in the middle of the thing, because for those of you that aren't aware, they apparently had this ongoing problem for years of sexual harassment and things like that, and having it swept under the rug and stuff. They got bought by Microsoft, yeah. So this was the statement that they released. This is if you go into public relations, you have to understand framing, because like it's all about framing the issue in such a way. So let me just read this to you. We're almost out of time, but just see if you can see the frame that they're trying to create here. Okay, Activision Blizzard has made a number of important improvements, including significant changes to personnel, exiting a number of employees, and expanding compliance resources. In addition, the company has refreshed its HR organization, and this week will welcome a new Chief People Officer, Julie Hodges, who joins the company from the Walt Disney Company. The company also has expanded training, performance management, and anti-harassment resources. The company remains committed. It's not a new commitment, it's an ongoing commitment. It remains committed to ensuring it is the most welcoming, most inclusive game company, and connecting and engaging its 400 million players through epic entertainment created by the very best people in the industry. Isn't that, like, can we get a clap emoji for whoever wrote this? Because this is a brilliant piece of PR, right? This is a fantastic bit of framing here. Yes. They're not admitting anything wrong, right? Like, we remain committed to being the most welcoming and inclusive, right? But they've made improvements anyway, despite already being the best. They're already the best. But they're just getting better. Fantastic. What takeaway points? What words from this jumped out at you? I might have sold it with some dramatic pauses, but what bits of art could you pick out from this? Oh yeah, McCree got renamed, right? Mm-hmm. He was one of the guys. We only do good things, and we are the best, so that excuses us from our actions. Remains committed. Yeah, remains committed is a great bit of framing, because it's not like we screwed up, we're going to do better. No, we were already committed to ensuring we're the most welcoming and inclusive game company. Already committed. We're just going to continue to be the most welcoming and engaging. Anti-harassment remains. Exiting. Yeah, exiting's a great word. Firing sounds so rude, doesn't it? We sacked a bunch of people. We we booted them. We gave them the boot. Nope. We exited them. Exited them. They have a chief people officer. It's a great word, also, chief people officer. What are you the chief of? People. From the Walt Disney Company. Yeah, it's interesting they mention that, right? Because Walt Disney has a reputation, perhaps undeserved, of being a very family-friendly, company and whatnot. If you actually look at their corporate structure, it's not. But the brand itself has held up remarkably well under the years, right? The Magic Kingdom, all this kind of stuff, right? Didn't Walt Disney dislike kids? I don't know. I'd have to look at that. Let's write that down. Let me write that down. We'll make a did Walt Disney dislike kids? Maybe we'll do like an urban legend, like treasure hunt one of these days or something like that. Happiest place on earth. Interesting enough if it's true. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. Okay. So different mental models. Here we have things taken from my Facebook feed from different friends. I want you to punch Nazis, with Captain America saying this, right? Obviously, it's your patriotic duty to punch Nazis. On the right, we have obviously a right-wing person who is making the point that everybody you don't like is Hitler when you're on the left, right? And so if you allow punching Nazis and everybody you don't like is a Nazi, then that just means you can punch everybody you don't like, right? And that's a problem, That's a problem when you just authorize political violence against everybody, right? On the left here, we have a frame on Antifa, again posted by a different one of my friends, who's a sympathizer, right? Sympathetic to the cause. And you have here the slingshot. This is the symbol of David and Goliath, right? The scrappy underdog taking on the power structure, right? Seal shame. This is all new to you? Yeah. And then on the right, you have this was posted by a right-wing friend of mine. All my heroes kill cops, making the point that they're not really heroes; they're cop killers, right? On the left here, we have somebody headed to Berkeley to disrupt the neo-Nazi white supremacist circle jerk today. Nervous AF, but determined to bring back 100 Nazi sculpts. He's there now and can help, comrade. Respect. Stay safe. And over here you have white men are terrorists, right? Left-wing meme, right-wing meme, right? And so we're basically out of time. But very important in debates, Nixon shot himself in the foot by saying, I am not a crook. Every American wants to know if their president is a crook, and I'm here to tell you I'm not a crook. Well, what that does, that sets the frame as being, all right, we need to talk. Is Nixon a crook or not? And then the question coming out of everyone's mouth is Nixon a crook? I don't know. Do you think he is? I don't know. And suddenly everybody's talking about if he is a crook, right? There's a highly self-destructive speech that he gave there. Reagan took the age issue. He was the oldest president at the time. Biden is now, which took the place of Trump being the oldest president. But at the time, Reagan was the oldest, and he took the issue here. And if you want to watch a video on it, it's a fantastic bit of verbal judo where he flipped it around and he said, I'm not going to hold my opponent's youth and inexperience against him. And his opponent was like, I don't know, 60 or something, right? And then the way that Reagan framed communism as being inefficient and, you have to wait 7 years to get a car, things like that. Clinton on how he framed welfare reform, right? It would sound very much like a Republican today, actually, if you watch Clinton on welfare reform. And the downside is that they limit us, right? Like they're a form of bias, and if you can't recognize your own frame, then it limits your view on a topic. It makes people with a different frame seem alien and hostile and evil to us because we don't understand them. A lot of times it leads to this notion everyone's a hypocrite. Yeah, I mean basically, because we all like in-group bias. We like people that agree with us. We like people that tell us we're smart. We don't want to think they're wrong. We have a definite bias against thinking that people on our team have done something wrong. We have a definite bias that people on the other team have done something wrong. and people don't like a friend of mine who's fairly left wing, I would say, was attacked by other left wing people because he said something critical of the left wing, and they're like, "You must be a Trump, neo right wing fascist." It's like, no, I'm not. I just, and he said something that I'm going to share with you to end class, which I think everybody should understand, which is that your side can be wrong. Can be. And with that, signing off.